Hello to everybody in the channel, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak in front of you. So my topic will be market segmentation and value chain shifts in the alternative meat market. But before moving to the topic, real quick, just an overview on Rightwing Partners, what we do, and a short introduction. So Gesa already said a few words. So we are the niche boutique consultancy focusing on plant fermentation and cell-based alternatives, be it food or feed, be it materials or specialties. Our clients are across the value chain, from large corporations to SMEs to governors and investors, and we have a global presence while providing services which range from innovation scouting to strategy development, growth acceleration, and operational excellence. So and we combine this by, on the one hand, strategy consultants like ex-Carney, ex-McKinsey, ex-Bain consultants, on the other hand, freelancers or subject matter experts, combined with a knowledge platform in terms of startups and expert database. So yeah, but so much to our company. And heading towards the topic, I would like to first of all emphasize the demand and supply gap we are running into. So on the one hand, if we look at it from a global perspective, on the one hand, we have the global demand for livestock products, which is rising. We have a rising population, rising middle class, rising overconsumption, and it's really difficult to reduce systematically the production and consumption waste. On the other hand, we have a supply which is limited, as we face limits in arable land, limits in freshwater, and agrochemical overuse, and so on. And of course, the livestock challenges we face in terms of antibiotic resistance and these kind of factors. So in the end, we will face a supply and demand gap in the near future. And alternative proteins, specifically alternative livestock products in general, are a good way to close this demand and supply gap. But if we look at the livestock products which are out there, we find that it's not just about alternative protein. Protein is one part of the food and feed livestock products, and which is an intermediate product, and there are several final products like meat, fish, dairy, and so on. But this is not the only livestock product. There are also materials and several specialties as well. For example, ingredients for the beauty industry, or specific products like ingredients for insulin, drug capsules, and so on. Just to give you an overview and to point out that it's beyond alternative protein, even though alternative protein is definitely a big part of the total business. But for now, I would like to continue with focusing on meat alternatives in particular. And if we look at the different meat alternative categories, we find that there are several different categories. On the one hand, we have classic vegan, classic vegetarian products, which have been around for decades, which lack the sensory profile. Sensory profile means taste, texture, flavor, and so on. Then we have insect-based products, which are good, but only good for human consumption to some extent. Nevertheless, the insect-based products have, even though they are not really similar to meat, they still have a great commercial potential, particularly as livestock feed. And then we have plant-based 2.0. This would be Beyond Meat, kind of like products or other companies in this field. We have fermentation-based ingredients. Then vegan products, for example, a mixture of plant-based 2.0 products mixed with cultured fat, and then cultivated product. Also, what we observe is that not every product, not every meat alternative has to become super close to the meat texture, flavor, and taste. It's also possible to have a fermentation-based ingredient which has a very high commercial potential, but is not coming close to the meat, to the actual meat. So there's not a parallel between meat similarity and commercial potential. If we, after looking at the product, different product categories, if we jump to the consumers and what they, why they buy meat alternatives at the moment, we see a difference between initial purchase and recurring purchase on the one hand. Initial purchase, a lot of people, or around 70% of first-time customers, buy it because of curiosity and mouth-to-mouth advertisement. So people want to try something new and yeah, just interested in finding out how it tastes. But to make people to buy these products more often and on a regular basis, you need to have a good taste, you need to have a good branding which people trust, and you need to have a good price in the long run to make this a convenient, to make this a everyday product for the mass consumer. If we then move away from the average consumer and come to more specific consumer groups, one, for example, is the more younger generation, millennials and Gen Z. Their decision is also based on taste, brand trust, and price. But in addition, we also see that the healthy eating as well as environmental and animal welfare concerns are driving factors for this generation. And of course, this generation will be the consumer, or is currently a consumer, and in the future will consume even more because they will generate higher incomes and so on. So these are criteria for future consumption, definitely. Having these factors for consumption in mind, when we then again look at the different alternatives, we see that if we compare the interesting categories, so plant-based 2.0, fermentation-based, cellular, and vegan hybrids, to traditional meat, we see that we have to consider several factors. So the sensory profile, as I said, the cost, healthiness, sustainability, scalability, and tech readiness. If we looking at the complete picture and we observe that the different product categories will most likely move into different parts of the total product segment. So not every technology will provide, or is best to provide, processed meat. For example, traditional animal products will move into the more bio and premium segment. The plant-based 2.0 products will drastically reduce prices. Today, there are already players out there who want to produce at meat price level or even below meat price level. And this will become a low-priced processed meat segment. If we look at fermentation-based ingredients, this will move into the low-priced and fresh meat segment to some extent. And cultured meat, obviously due to the high cost, it will start at a high-priced niche market and then needs to move into the fresh meat segment, because for fresh meat products, you can generate higher prices. And last but not least, the hybrid products are at a medium price level, being a mixture of, for example, plant-based 2.0 and cultured fat. So the main takeaway here is that it's not just about burgers and sausages and processed meat. If we look at the meat market, this is actually the smaller part. 70% of the global meat market is fresh meat cuts. So when looking at meat alternatives, and if meat alternatives really want to fill the gap in the meat value chain or even grow to a certain level, they need to be able to deliver all meat products. And this being said, different technologies should move into different segments, different product segments. If we thereafter now jump to the value chain perspective, we see a different perception across the value chain. So generally speaking, the downstream part sees the whole meat alternative development as a chance, and the upstream part of the value chain sees it as a risk. While talking to several players across the value chain, we recognize that in the traditional meat value chain, we see that definitely the downstream players, so retailers, FMCG, CPGs see it as a chance. Meat processors are somehow in between. Some see it as a chance to transform their business. Some neglect meat alternatives. But if we look upstream, a lot of players see it as an absolute risk. For example, talking to companies like Bayer Monsanto, they see it as a risk because they are dependent on a large quantity of, or large number of livestock to, so that the livestock consumes a lot of harvest, and in the end, Bayer can produce a lot of agrochemicals. So there's a different perception across the value chain. If we then move to plant products in general, so not only alternative meat, but all kinds of plant products, we see also that the downstream players perceive it as a chance, and upstream, particularly harvest, seeds, machinery, and agrochemical companies rather as a risk. And then there are, of course, the non-food players who would like to enter these value chains. So it's not just about food companies and agrochemical and retail, wholesale, and agriculture companies. It's also about increasingly tech companies who want to enter these value chains and see a chance to get a part of the value creation. And this is super interesting because these companies bring different core competencies into the value chain, which were not required in the past. And then it gets interesting on who will capture which part of the value chain and who is really in a good position to win in the long run. But now the question is, generally speaking, what is required to win in these or to move into the value chain with a good, proper value position? And also, generally speaking, of course, this depends on the type of company, on the market they are in, and so on. So more on a detailed level. But in general, it's three factors are important. So either you as a company have one of these factors, or you have all three of them. But if you have none of these factors, then most likely it will be difficult to win in meat alternative markets. So one is the technology. You need a defendable technology which has a high potential and is leads to a clear product differentiation. The second is in terms of production and distribution, you need to combine a regional focus with a flexible production model, a good network of distribution into retail and food service. And last but most important, you need to be able to produce at a large scale with a stable product quality process in place, while at the same time being able to reduce cost. And this is the big challenge a lot of companies face at the moment. Thirdly, consumer insights and branding. Of course, you need to understand the consumer insights on a local level. So I see a lot of studies out there talking about general consumer factors like price, taste, and so on, and sustainability and healthy products and so on. But it also depends pretty much on which country you're active in. And there's a huge difference in terms of purchase criteria between countries and also between consumer-facing brands. Lastly, of course, companies need to be proactive in health debate and have a proactive communication and PR strategy in place. So these three factors are critical for most of the companies entering the meat alternative space in order to win in the long run. So coming to an end, and just to summarize everything, so the main takeaways would be three main takeaways. One thing is the market segmentation is crucial. It's not only about processed meat, it's also not only about alternative protein. If we want to close the supply and demand gap for livestock products, we need to consider all kinds of products and all kinds of product segments. The second point is, looking across the value chain, we see movements, players in downstream moving further upstream. We see new players entering value chains and so on. There will be a lot of movement in the next 5 to 10 years. And the big question is, which company is best positioned to fill which kind of value chain gap? And the third point is three factors are required to win: technology, production and distribution, as well as consumer insights and branding. That was it for my side. Thank you very much for listening.